Hi, everybody. I'm Kristy Woodson Harvey, and I am so excited to be here today for this episode of Blank to Beautiful, where we interview authors, designers, artists, and creatives about that magical transition from taking something blank and turning it into something beautiful. My guest today is the very talented author, Kelly Harms.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her. Kelly is the USA Today, Washington Post, and #1 Amazon bestseller of, is it 4 novels?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't have that written down for some reason. She's an author, a mother, and a self-proclaimed big dreamer. She lives in Madison, Wisconsin with her, I love this, her sparkling son, Griffin, her fluffy dog, Scout, and her beloved Irishman, Chris. She lived in New York previously and worked with many of her author heroes as an editor at HarperCollins and then as a literary agent at the Jane Rosen Agency. So she gets a lot of questions from her author friends like me because she knows all the behind the scenes of the biz. So we're here celebrating Kelly today because she has a brand new book out in the world called The Bright Side of Going Dark. And so will you start out by just telling us a little bit about that?
Okay, so Bright Side is what happened when I started working on my social media for work, just part of what we do every day so that we can reach our readers without necessarily going into their emails and sort of attacking them in a way they don't want, where they're open and they want to be in a conversation. So I started with that social, and as the book started to come out, that sort of started to get more and more overwhelming and fulfilling, and yet psychically you sort of start to take on the things your followers tell you and the ideas that they have and what they want from you. And this was on a very small scale. I'm not a huge influencer. It was just my people, my readers, people who were familiar with my books in a way that made them probably feel that they were familiar with me and probably are kind of, I mean, in our books, right?
Yeah.
So as I was doing that, I started to think about what it would be like if this was on this grander scale. Not maybe the people that we see on Bravo necessarily, but everybody else between me and Bravo is this huge window of people whose lives are kind of funded by some of their social work or social media work, I should say, or who have made it into a business. And at the same time, there were a lot of scandals going around about people making decks about things that would happen in their lives if they got the sponsorships for them to happen. I don't know if you remember reading about those, but it kind of curled my hair because I thought, okay, these influencers are already giving me some unrealistic expectations about how to be, not just how to be in my actual life, but how to be on social media, how to interact with people, what we need to project of ourselves. And I think we're all feeling this in a different way right now because when I go online, I'm seeing people who every day homeschool is like the best thing that ever happened, and it's making the crafts and the baking the bread and knitting the things and long walks in the park and hikes. And then there's like,
you have not seen that on mine.
Yeah. I mean, that's not my reality. So it's like homeschool is fun. I'm spending time with my kids. We're doing a few cool things. Mostly we're trying to make sure he knows his math. And then after that, we're doing reading and we're calling it a good day, right?
Right.
So and I bake bread, but like it's because we really don't want to go to the store and get bread.
You're getting good at the bread though. Like you're really, it's a thing for you now, I feel like.
Yeah, the bread is always going. So that is true. So anyway, this is why the influencers and how they affected me started to become interesting. And then the more that I dove into this, I saw that they were affecting Americans in general because they changed how our relationship with our phone works. And that they were a big part of the racket that is using people as the product and our eyes as the product to sell instead of to their advertisers. So that started with sort of this kind of almost sinister, dark little interest that I found. But when I started to pull that thread, I realized that there are so much good coming out of it too. Just the way that people connect to each other in times like this.
Of course.
And we are living this moment right now and saying, oh my gosh, for everything we hate about social media, there is a good.
Yeah.
There's a way to get information that you can trust from people you care about. There is a way to be in touch with family members who are far away, and or in our case, we have books coming out. Normally, we'd be at the libraries.
Yeah.
We'd be talking to humans, which I miss so much.
No.
But we can't. We just can't. So here we are finding ways to get around that. And without all of our amazing tech, we would, I don't know, the books would be just done. So as I sort of pulled this thread, I found the two sides of the story. And I gave each side of the story a different character to tell the story with. And they were so hard to work with, these two characters. I found them to be the most argumentative. Well, we'll see. The new one's giving me trouble too, but that's always the way. I mean, talk about from blank to beautiful. Until these women started to give me inconvenient parts of their backstory that weren't what I originally wanted the book to be, then I couldn't really get them to talk to me. And I found that what I started out to write, which was just kind of an indictment of our tech altogether, quickly morphed into this: here's the good, here's the bad, and here's what we have to hold on to when we're using it so that we hold on to our humanity. So that's what they wanted. That was the story that the imaginary creatures in my head wanted me to tell.
I love it. I mean, I think it's such an interesting story, not only for right now, when you're right, we are seeing the good and the bad of the tech side of things, but just for our time in general. And, you know, there are so many arguments for both sides of this. Like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And, you know, I would tell you a lot of the time that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have to do the social media and the whatever. But my Instagram like got deleted a couple of days ago because someone was like pretending to be me and like put up a fake account, and it's still up there, by the way. So do not follow Kristy Woodson Harvey on Instagram. She is not me. It's Kristy W. Harvey. But it was gone. And it was interesting to me how not only was I like, oh my gosh, I've worked for 7 years on this account for my business, but also how I missed my people. Like, it's so weird how you're so used to, like, you have these people that you don't know, you've never met, and you interact with them every single day. And I'm like, I don't know what they're doing now. Like, wonder what's going on in their world. And it's such a strange phenomenon that I think you've really touched on something here that's interesting.
It is where we connect in this new way, and we can even be a little bit more ourselves sometimes.
Oh, well, and I do think, especially during, you know, I think I've felt more that way, you know, during this time of not being with my friends every day, like to be able to see, you know, what their kids are doing today or whatever, you know, just because we're in such a different world. So,
and then both of us are part of a world where Bookstagram is a big thing. And so, I find myself finding new reads that way and reaching out to new authors. And I would really miss that if it were gone all of a sudden.
I would too. And that's how I feel like that's how I hear about books now, which is kind of crazy that that's how we get our information. But they're like Bookstagrammers that I follow, and they have the most beautiful photos. And I can't wait to see what they're reading and what I need to be reading and how they present it and what they think. And
it is, and it's so counterintuitive, because at first I thought, what do books have to do with photos?
Right. But
I have come around and see the light now.
I love it. Well, I think it's kind of funny, like how we met. So I was just going to tell a little bit about that, and then I have some more questions for you. But your very first book, The Good Luck Girls of Shipwreck Lane, right? Yes. So I just was in the library, and it was just on the shelf, and I saw it, and I thought that looks like a good book. And I went home and I read it, and I absolutely loved it. And then Kelly's editor reached out to me the next year to blurb her second book. And I mean, we didn't know each other. I never reached out to her to say, oh my gosh, I loved your book. It was so great. It was just total happenstance. And so I ended up like being able to blurb that book, which I was so excited about. And then we became Tall Poppy writers together again. Total happenstance. I mean, and we didn't
live anywhere near each other. Mm-hmm. We don't have any friends in common that I know of, or at least we didn't then. It was that you found me in the bookstore in the library is bananas, because there's so much to read.
Well, there's so much to read. And I mean, I live in a town of 3,000 people. So we do not have like a vast, I mean, it's not like we have all the books, you know? So, I mean, just the fact that, you know, not, I feel like the Southern books kind of get like top billing in our library because they're local and there are people who are coming there. And so anyway, it was a lot of happenstance.
You found a Yankee book and you still liked it.
It was so good. It was so good. Yes, I loved it. I still have a soft spot for that book. I mean, I loved the Overdue Life of Amy Byler too. That was so good. And I have not read The Bright Side yet, but I will. It's on my list.
Oh, you've read plenty.
I have read all of, what though, that is kind of interesting because I think especially now as authors, when we get so much to read all the time, and I'm preaching to someone who was an editor and an agent, so I'm sure you're like, what do you mean you're not reading hardly at all? But it's really something to have an author that you've read every one of their books.
It's so unique. And I was saying the same thing actually when I was talking about recommending summer reads. I thought, what really sets somebody apart for me is a summer read I want to read every summer, not just I've done one of her books and I've got the idea,
Yeah.
So, I was actually thinking about a couple of people. You were one of them when I was giving people summer read recommendations.
Yeah.
And then Marissa de los Santos was the other person I was thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is funny how that happens. But yeah, so it's really great. So we're in this wonderful Tall Poppy Writers together that we always have to give a shout out to. That was just named one of the 101 best websites by Writers Digest, which is hugely exciting.
And not that surprising because it's the Tall Poppies is kind of a unique and amazing collaboration of people working together, even though technically we're kind of all on top of each other in the same space.
Right. That's true. We are, but we still all help each other. It's an interesting kind of dynamic. It was a surprise to me because I felt like people would be a little more territorial about their space, but I think everyone is very willing to share everyone else's books and, be a cheerleader for everyone else, which is great. So tell us, when you were growing up, like when you were a little girl and you were thinking, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up. Did you ever think you would be a writer?
Well, I didn't, but I think people around me had a pretty good idea.
Okay.
I was determined to go to medical school and be a doctor.
Me too.
Really?
Yes.
Are we both like the most practical authors we know?
Oh, we have to be. And I'm KWH and you're KHW.
I know.
Out there.
I know.
The similarity.
The very same point. And I thought I was going to go to med school, so I went to a really prestigious science college. And when I was around, I don't know, maybe I think it must have been the junior year, I did an internship at a magazine that had a book section because back then magazines had book sections. And I got letters from agents and publicists all the time. And because I was, 17 at the time, I had no idea that there was more to the book business than writing the book and then putting a cover on it and sending it to like the store in the mall where I bought the book.
Right.
So my mind was blown and I started writing letters to these agents and publicists and saying what's your job like? Do you ever need an intern? I'll move to New York City and be your intern. Eventually somebody said yes. So.
Wow, that is so cool. And I think that's a really good point too, because I've said many times, I think if I had known there were agents and editors and all of these people, that actually might have been a career path that I would have really pursued. I couldn't wrap my mind around being a writer. That just didn't seem like a job.
Exactly. It seemed like a job for other people.
Right, exactly. It seemed like a job that other people could do, but that I would never get to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And partly because I'm sort of practical by nature. And then when I saw that these people were forming a job around books, I thought, well, that's really good. That's close enough for me. And it really was. It wasn't until I'd been doing it for maybe 5 or 6 years that I thought, I should give this a try myself and see what happens.
So what was that transition like for you? And I think that's a good kind of lead into, what is your creative process like? How did that start for you?
That started with, when I started my family. Yeah. And New York City is crazy. It's wonderful and I miss it all the time. Yeah. But I hadn't grown up there, so I couldn't really see what a childhood would be like. So when we started thinking about starting our family, I couldn't really compute the bucolic farmland childhood versus the kids who were like riding the subway when they were 4 and didn't have a park and didn't have an outdoor space.
Right.
And so we started talking about relocating, and that like all the stars kind of aligned. And then, I wanted to be closer to my family so that when Griffin came, he could be part of the larger clan.
Right.
And so all of a sudden it made sense to stay home and work from home. And I was doing a lot of freelance. I was writing a lot of freelance, actually.
Yeah.
And part of my job for the freelance was to read.
Mhm.
And I kept thinking, gosh, it used to be that I got to read really the super highest caliber books because, HarperCollins is a great publisher and our agency has amazing clients. So I never had any question that I was reading like the creme de la creme.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I started freelancing for all the different publishers and all the different agencies, I thought, geez, there's actually maybe a chance that my story might fit in here somewhere. I mean, if your boss is giving you Kristen Hanna and Luann Rice, Tess Gerritsen, Lisa Gardner as your solid diet, Sarah Edmond, you start to forget that there's like new writers out there too.
Right. Yeah. No, it's so true.
So that kind of opened the door for me. And then when we got to Madison, I just started writing because it's so much less distracting here. There's less to do. And the book went to my agent right before I went into labor. Griffin came really early. And so I sent it to her and she sent it to editors. And I got my first call while I was in labor with Griffin.
Wow.
It was so weird.
That is a story right there. That's a really great story. And so why did
I take a call from my agent when I was in labor? Like, that's the question that still stays with me.
No, I know, but I do think that speaks to something about what it is that we do, because it is, being on all sides of that, you knew how difficult it was to be able to get that call. And you knew, I bet that was really interesting though, to go from being the person that made those calls to then being the person receiving that call.
Yes. And then it's like a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Right. So now I've been a writer for longer than, right around the same amount of time that I was working in publishing. And publishing has changed a lot in that time.
Yeah.
So now that it's been a while and I have my background and I understand how the numbers work and everything, I still am constantly amazed and surprised by like what new surprises and changes are going to come our way. And then sometimes new challenges.
Sure. Yeah, always. I think it is a constantly evolving business for sure. So if you were going to give a piece of advice to someone who really wanted to break into being a writer, what would your advice be for them?
Well, everybody always says read. And I do want to second that. Yeah. But I would say read a little bit more widely than you normally do, because one of the hardest things when you're a young writer is finding where you fit in and believing that you can see yourself on the bookstore shelves. And if you read only in what you imagine is your genre, then you're missing out on tons of great storytelling techniques and also maybe on a better way for you to get your story across. So I say go to a different department. Next time you're calling your indie bookstore and asking for recommendations, say, can you give me something, like dig a little deeper? Can you give me the next thing after that? Or I've read that author before. Let's try something that's adjacent. And just see if you can find where you really believe you can see yourself.
That's such good advice. I don't think I've ever heard that phrased in that particular way. I really, really like that. Is there one book that you think everyone should read?
Feels Like Falling.
Well, I was going to say, besides Feels Like Falling, obviously.
Like every writer is probably going to come across On Writing by Stephen King. Yeah. And I like that one because, there are so many great writing books and they're on my website, and I encourage you to go check them out if you're really inspired to. Yeah. But the reason that I like that one for writers is because it is so inclusive. It says there's room for everybody out here. And I completely agree. One of the things you hear most when you're a writer is, oh, I have a great story. I could tell it to you and you could write it. And I want to say, no, you are going to be the one to write that story.
Right.
And so I kind of give everybody who's watching permission to go and write that story. And that's why I recommend this book of all the other sort of general writing books. But the other book I'm crazy about for people who are creatives, whether they're designers, writers, artists, is a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, which you should check out because it's about not just with your devices, but also with the rest of the world swirling around you, how to tune that stuff out and really give your best work, even if it's only for a couple of hours a day. And how a really focused 45 minutes of work is better than 8 hours of sort of switching gears all the time.
You know what? My husband has that book. He has told me to read that before. I was like, I know I've heard of that, but yeah, he has definitely. And it's so funny. You're talking, and there are these beautiful birds like behind your head, like moving out the world around you. And right as you say it, this bluebird just makes its way through the air behind your head. It was like you just put him there for your. No, that's great though. Those are very. That's very good advice. And I do think that's something that like I am really trying to work on. So I will certainly read that book. I feel like I should read more writing books than I have too. I'm like in it now. I should probably like maybe go back and check out the basics. I don't know.
My secret is that I don't read them until I'm stuck and I need help.
That's a
read as needed. They're like those prescriptions, only take as needed, because if you read too much, you lose your voice, you lose who you are, and you start following rules that maybe don't apply to you.
That's a good point too. And I do feel like at the beginning when I was starting to write, I was reading all these things and there were all these rules and I'm a rule follower. I mean, that type A.
I had somebody tell me the other day, I could never write a prologue. They're not allowed anymore. And I thought, okay, let's step
back. Prologues all the time. That's fine.
Dickens wrote some prologues. Prologues are fine.
Okay. We'll be okay with prologues. Okay. So just a couple more things. Will you tell us, or can you tell us what is next for you or what you're working on? Or are you taking a breather?
No, never a breather.
Well, that's what I said in this last thing. I was like, no.
So I'm excited to say that in a week, I'll be turning in my next book. And I've come back to motherhood again because I keep thinking about it all the time. Yeah. And I'm going to spend some time talking about those Pinterest moms who get those perfect little bento boxes for their children. And the animals all look like endangered species. And it's just, this fruit sushi. It's fruit sushi, basically. It's fruit sushi, the book.
That's what it should be called.
I mean, we've made some fruit sushi in this house. Don't get me wrong. We are looking for ideas here. But this book is just really about the push-pull, not between the mommy wars, but between this exceptionally performative kind of parenting, and then perhaps maybe way on the other side, the let somebody else do it, I'm gonna go do my own thing kind of parenting. And there's kind of a value in both of those, and where do we find the right places in between?
That sounds awesome. Well, tell us where we can find you online. Speaking of Pinterest moms, where can we find you online, Kelly?
You'll never find me on Pinterest unless it's like for my bang cutting experiment but the rest of the time I'm at kelly.harms on Instagram. And otherwise I'm just at kellyharms.com. Easy to find.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being our guest. We really appreciate it. And I will drop links below about where you can find Kelly and where you can find her new book, The Bright Side of Going Dark, which is available now. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.